Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Dodderwick, and thank you for joining me at the table. This week, I'm sitting down with Msgr Dan Wathen, who is the Diocesan Vocations Director and Pastor at St. Jude Thaddeus in Havre, Montana. Msgr, thank you for joining me.
It's good to be here.
In addition to being the Vocation Director, you're also the Vicar General of the Diocese, aren't you?
Yeah, so just a few hats to balance.
Just a few.
But it's fun.
I'm sure we'll have a time to sit down and talk about what the Vicar General does at some point, but today we're going to talk about vocations and your role as the Vocations Director.
Perfect.
What exactly do you do in that role? Because we hear vocations and it's used in a couple of different ways throughout the church. And so as your role as the Vocations Director for the diocese,
all right, what do you do? So we kind of have a team approach in terms of vocations. So I'm the Director of Vocations. So my kind of role is to help promote people who are maybe considering their vocation, maybe just even feeling that calling of God, but not really sure what to do with it. And so I get to kind of be one of those initial kind of interactions between someone discerning their vocation and then also somebody who is thinking maybe seminary is where God's calling me, or to the priesthood or religious life. And so it's kind of fun to be able to walk on that side of it. And then the other half of that is Father Jay Peterson helps with the director of seminarians. So once we kind of have them through the paperwork into the seminary, then he kind of takes over to follow up with kind of the academic roles, just any of their needs once they're in seminary.
Sure.
So that way we can kind of keep each other, making sure that vocations is kind of a priority on our to-do list every day.
Right now, are we seeing any kind of trends in people who are reaching out to you about vocations, whether it's increase or decrease?
We're seeing an increase in people reaching out and asking, inquiring, and then it's kind of taking that next step with them. So we have seen an increase. I'm hoping that this coming year we'll have an increase in vocations that we'll have officially being able to announce. And so looking forward to that.
Do you have any speculation as to what might be causing the increase of people actually going deeper and asking that question?
I really just feel like God has put this calling on people's hearts, and, it's really all different kind of walks of life right now. So there are some kind of older people discerning, some younger people discerning. And so I really feel like God's just kind of put this calling out there, and people really trying to figure out how can I kind of live out a calling that God's asking of me. And so they're really thinking about that, and contemplating that.
When someone reaches out to you, what are your first conversations with them? Because I know when I was a child, or younger, not when I was a child, but younger, I was so eager that, hey, I want to go to seminary now. How do you approach that whenever somebody reaches out to you?
So normally I ask them to just tell me a little bit about their faith journey, what's gotten them to this point where they're reaching out. Because even reaching out to a vocation director can be pretty intimidating. I mean, I know when I was discerning, it was actually one of the guys on my hall that reached out to the vocation director. So, no pressure there. But, I think anyone who's discerning, there's a lot of commonalities to where you can relate your story to theirs, kind of that questioning of heart, and kind of even that journey from the heart to the head, because sometimes you get this calling and you're like, well, this just doesn't make sense, to me. And so kind of even walking through that part, learning a little bit about their families, their backgrounds, what they've been doing, because some people have been working or in careers. And so kind of just having that feeling that there's something more that they're called to, and then just reaching out to want to do that. So
I bet that's a very enriching moment to be able to journey with those individuals as they do take that step of almost a risk for them. They feel like it's a risk of talking as a formal step. And I bet it's just a wonderful journey for you.
Sometimes I think when we wear the clerics, or just being a priest, you can walk into people's lives in a way that you can't otherwise. And so being able to walk into somebody's faith journey is a really big privilege, because it is a moment of vulnerability. I mean, sometimes the way God works in your life, like I always laugh that for me, I was not going to go into the priesthood. I was going to go into politics, and God kept bringing me back. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense, But that's the beauty of God's call in our life. And I think that's the beauty also of being able to ask your own pastors, what was their journey in that vocation story? Because it really makes it accessible to everybody.
As the Vocations Director, and these people come forward to you, you probably have men who are discerning religious order as well. Can you speak a little bit to the different kind of life that diocesan priests lead as opposed to religious order priests? Because I'm sure that's part of your help in their discernment, is deciding which path.
One of the ways that it was described to me, it kind of uses military terms, but they kind of describe the diocesan priest as the soldier on the front line. So you're generally in a parish, whatever comes your way is what you deal with. So it could be dealing with funerals or baptisms. I mean, all of the highlights of people's lives. So you can be dealing with any of that. So religious order priests, we kind of describe them more like the Marines, because they have a charism. So there's some type of focus to that religious order that kind of becomes their primary focus. And then they may be in parishes. We have a few religious order priests in parishes, even in our diocese, but they tend to always keep that maybe lens or that focus in terms of their ministry, whether it's care for the poor or vulnerable or academics.
When a young lady reaches out to you, how do you help her journey through her discernment?
So a lot of that journey is trying to find a community. So a lot of times, you're looking at what is the charism. So is there an area that they're interested in, whether it be teaching, being a nurse or things like that. And then trying to find a religious order that is good for them and a good fit. So generally it's trying to get them to go visit a community for a while, just to see what the community does, how the community lives out that vocational calling.
When an individual comes to you, we've already used the word a couple times, discernment. They need to discern this calling. The church often talks about discernment, but doesn't necessarily teach discernment to people. Can you speak a little bit to what discernment is, how authentic discernment takes shape, and maybe some of the challenges of authentic discernment?
Okay. I think with discernment, we do use a lot of terminology. I would say at the core of it is going to be prayer, even prayer, but since it's the year of the Eucharist, or kind of a trilogy of years, but really just focusing on the Eucharist, and even in time of adoration, to really open oneself up to how is God speaking in my life? How is God working in my life? So that's a component of discernment, really knowing how God works in your life, how God answers your prayers. And then from there, it can blossom into a whole variety of kind of questions. We all have questions, and is this life what I'm called to? And so I think that it begins with prayer, but then it also begins with looking at what is the life that you're called to. And then from that are there any questions you have about living a celibate life? Are there any questions you have about kind of following the direction of the bishop and, where he sends you? And so I think there's working on trust, working on growing in the spiritual life. So sometimes even having access to a spiritual director can be helpful. I know in my discernment, there was a priest that was part of the discernment group on campus. And so having somebody that you can talk things through really helps a lot. And it makes it to where you see, sometimes we don't think of the priesthood or religious life as something for me, but then when you start talking to a priest or a religious, you really realize they're just like you and I. I mean, they're human. And so it really just allows it to be something where you begin to see yourself, hey, I could do that, and I know a big component of trying to really discern will come at, one stage is saying, yes, I'm going to discern. There's another step that I'd say you run into that question of priesthood, diocesan priesthood or religious life. And that's a huge question. For me, it came down to all of the priests that I knew throughout my discernment and in my life all happened to be diocesan priests. So I said, okay, I really like the Dominicans, but I feel like my imagery of priesthood is formed by diocesan priests. And so I reverted to that as, okay, this is where you're called to be.
From when you started seminary, were you certain that you were going to be a priest, or does discernment continue through seminary?
Discernment definitely continues through seminary. For me, I got roped into a discernment group on campus because one of the guys in my hall wanted to go, and his roommate I was good friends with. So he said, I'm not going to this bunch of crazy guys by myself, so you're coming along. And I'm like, okay. But turned out to be a great group to just talk about whatever was weighing on our hearts, or however God was working in our life. So I kind of feel like I fought God my entire college life, going back and forth, priesthood or politics. And I always tell people, it always came down to, okay, this is the last time I'm debating this and I'm choosing politics. And I swear it was like 30 seconds later and I was right back to that priesthood or politics. And I'm like, okay, I think I just have to go and see. And so even when I went into the seminary, I had no idea what I was getting into, and got to meet a great group of guys just trying to figure out what God was doing in their life and how God was working in their life. And, so I was a little intimidated because I'm like, man, this guy really knows about the lives of the saints, or this guy really knows about the liturgy and all these areas. But that's where you really begin to learn. And I always thought at the table is where you really got to learn more about the faith that we have. And it was a beautiful thing.
What advice would you give to someone who does think that they are hearing that voice starting to nag on them?
I guess what I would say is the first thing is reach out to maybe your parish priest. See if there's maybe a youth minister that you can talk to, because being able to ask questions is a beautiful thing, but sometimes we're not sure who to ask. And you can also reach out to the vocations office, myself, Father Jay, soon to be Father Matthew, helping out, and just being able to connect and ask the questions, and kind of not feeling like you're maybe in a storm where you're just not sure where to go.
The journey really, while it is an individual journey, it's a communal journey at the same time.
Definitely rely upon other people praying for you. I know my mom always prayed for Father David Wilkins, and so she was happy when he finally said yes and became a priest. But it really is a community calling, and you're going to be called to serve the people. And so getting their prayers early on is I would say, a very important part. So even just asking people to pray for you, in this process is a helpful thing.
If there's a young man or a young woman out there who does feel like they're having a whisper of the hounds of heaven starting to chase after them, how is it that they can get in touch with you?
The easiest way to get a hold of me is my cell phone number. So it's 406-697-7039. And if I don't pick up right away, leave a message and I'll get back to you. You can also reach out via email, djwathen, WATHEN, @gmail.com, or you can find that information on our vocational posters that are posted in the entryways of your parishes. And we'd love to have a conversation, love to hear where your journey is taking you.
Monsignor, I appreciate you taking time today to have this conversation, and I appreciate the service you provide to the diocese by promoting authentic discernment and vocations for young people and even older people as they're trying to figure out where God wants them.
Exactly.